The wrong item. So Graham and Chris, can we we're scheduled for 45 minutes. Can we do this in a half an hour, do you think?
We probably can, but it's up to you. I'm here at your discretion in terms of how many questions you have.
Well, what we might have to do is, if we go late, we'll have to come back. Are you
Okay.
gonna be okay with that?
I'm
if
fine with
That puts
that.
us there?
Yes.
Alrighty, I'll turn it over to you
All right.
to speak
Well,
with.
thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Graham Fenley with Grant Thornton. I feel like I've been part of the conversation already. So this is our regular oversight report on the Business Renew programs. There we go. I actually would like to start out by addressing a little bit of the conversation previously, because I think it was a very good topic about our role and how we best serve the board. And I think the concept of we are your consultants is probably the key piece of that. And a couple of things that I think Jack and Brian and Chris all said that are relevant is part of our role should be to advise you on what questions to ask of the project sponsors and other staff, so that you can maybe be a little bit more educated about, what are some of the key issues and themes. But the other thing that I would encourage you is to give us direction about things that you want to know more about. And that may be, as was referenced, maybe separate education sessions, or it could be things you really want to hear about in these regular briefings that you would like us to focus on something in particular around a particular project or the program as a whole. So I would very much encourage you to give us that direction. In terms of this report, we're actually changing the format a little bit, I think, as Jack mentioned. In addition to our regular status reports on where each of the projects are and around potential risks and issues and our focus areas and the month, we're also going to be starting this month a regular assessment of the business objectives, the strategic business objectives for each project, and our assessment of how on track the project is to achieve those business objectives. As you might expect, particularly with, for example, the pension solution, that's a very long-term activity, and it could be several years, will be several years, before all of them are achieved. But what we hope to be able to do is give you, I would say, advance warning or early warning signs if any of those objectives are at risk. And it doesn't necessarily have to wait until the actual implementation work starts. It could be something that would happen during the procurement process that we would want to flag as, this is something that maybe requires your attention. And so that would be part of our objective going forward, is to give you our thoughts about where the projects are against those strategic objectives. And, it may not change for each objective, on a month-by-month basis, but as things happen, we can give you our assessment of whether, the projects are progressing on a path to achieve those objectives. As usual, the slides we're presenting are based on our August assessment report. As usual, things have happened just in the few weeks since that report was finalized. And particularly this month, it's actually been a pretty good month for the Business Renew projects as a whole. And I'll be talking a little bit about the most recent developments and our expectations for our report, which will come out in September. I can tell you now our anticipation we're likely to be upgrading a number of the report projects in the next iteration, because it really has been quite a positive month for the project as a whole. So with that, we'll start with Business Direct. We're going to start the discussion around strategic objectives for the project, and then move on to more of the tactical status, I would say. And we're also going to follow up a little bit, I think, on the conversation we had in the July board meeting about sort of the user experience and how the users are feeling about the project. So to start with, in terms of where do you get the objectives for Business Direct, there are a couple of different lists to choose from, all very similar. The one that we're working from is the outcomes, the target outcomes that were defined for the project in the budget change proposal in fiscal 11 and 12. And this really sort of identified what the project was intending to achieve. And there are 10 of them. I've got 2 slides here. So I'll quickly run through our assessment at this point. There's a general theme that we'll come across that it's generally too early to tell for a lot of these, but there's some things we can say some things about, and I'll have another recommendation a little bit later on. So the first is around improved internal controls and risk mitigation. Our assessment is that given the functionality that has been implemented and also the feedback we're getting from the user community, this has likely been achieved, but it's really too early to tell for certain. It will take more time and some additional analysis before we know whether the internal controls really have been improved, but we think this is likely to have been achieved. There are two sets of reporting targets that were very similar, one around financial reporting and one around budget reporting. And for both of those, the intent was to achieve reliable, accessible, and timely information, so parsing out those different areas. On the reliability piece, which a lot of this is around accuracy, I would say have not achieved that yet, but the situation is improving. I think, as you're aware, there were a number of data conversion issues when the system first went live. They've been struggling with those and sort of resolving them item by item ever since the system went live. As the system is stabilizing, the instances of data issues are going down, and the data, I think, is becoming more and more accurate, but it's not quite there yet. It's interesting. There've been a couple of examples where data has had to be manually fixed because there were identification that it was wrong coming out of the system. There've also been a couple of examples where people thought the data was probably wrong just because it didn't feel right, but when they went and looked, the system was actually right, and people's expectations were wrong. So the system is definitely becoming more reliable in that sense, but it's not fully there yet. On the accessibility perspective, in terms of how easy is it to get to this data and the timeliness, how quickly can you get to this data, not yet achieved. Release 1.5, which is the release that's scheduled for later this year, that includes a lot of the reporting functionality that wasn't implemented in January, that's really going to should make a big difference in this arena around your ability to get access to data more easily and in a timely manner. Right now, it still takes quite a lot of time to get access to the data, and it's not necessarily that easy for people. The next target was around cost accounting applications. This is what Release 2 of Business Direct is all about, implementing project accounting and cost accounting. So there's nothing really being implemented at this point, and it won't be until Release 2 is implemented. The last one on this page is, again, these terms: reliable, accessible, and timely reporting of member accounts receivable and payable. So again, parsing out these terms, reliability, at this point, it seems that has been achieved with the start interface and the interfaces and reconciliation back and forth to start, but it's probably too early to make a final conclusion, but it does seem likely that that has been achieved. And again, around accessibility and timeliness to data, this again will be improved, should be improved significantly once Release 1.5 goes live, but today it's still harder to get the data, and it's not necessarily as timely as it could be. 1.5 should improve this again, so that's coming later in the year. I'll go on to the next slide, and then I'll take questions. Oh, yeah.
Graham, I'm just trying to, I actually went back to the last item to look at how our staff put together the project objective and scope. I think it's TRB 24, for the Business Renew project, because I'm just trying to get a handle on, for each of these projects, what's the point, what's the goal? And I think Jack, I should be more explicit to say, I completely concur with Jack's comments that our goal in oversight really is, are we doing what what the goal is? Are we achieving the goal? And so just help me understand with Business Direct, the goal really is, it's budgeting, procurement, accounting, managing our contracts, correct?
Yes.
Employing internal controls. I guess I want to understand maybe how our staff's project objective interfaces with the goals that you've put out on this slide. Does that make sense? So I can best, because what I'm trying to do as a board member is go, where are we at with this goal? And so I'm just trying to match staff with what you're saying.
There are two things to think about. One is you have Business Renew as a program level, which is what Chris was talking about previously. So that's a program that includes multiple projects. Each of those projects have their own set of goals and objectives. And so as I'm going through, I'm reporting on 4 projects today. For every one of them, I'm going to be saying these are the objectives of this specific project: Business Direct, Pension Solution, Data Prep, Enterprise Information Management. And then as each of the individual project sponsors are talking to you, they'll be talking about these things. So when Robin comes up, these are actually on her report in terms of objectives for Business Direct, I'm going to be talking about the very same objectives that Peggy and Chris were talking about around the pension solution. So there isn't, I don't believe, really a separate set of objectives for the program as a whole. Like Business Renew does not have a set of objectives.
I'm not talking about business, I'm talking about Business Direct,
Okay.
right? I'm talking about the separate, and I'm clear with you on the 4 projects that you're gonna go through that are all, I think I get the idea now of Business Renew is the big kahuna, Business Direct is one of the projects under the big umbrella. So I think I'm more just, again, trying to interface our staff's goals or the stated objectives in the write-up that we had in item 3 with the goals that you're kind of going through for us with Business Direct.
And it's not item 3 this month, it's item 3 the last time?
Right. I'm looking at,
It's on TRB 24.
yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm looking at from
Yeah.
this, just last item, so.
Yeah, and so these are, I guess you could call these summary statements of the
Okay.
objectives and scope, but each of the projects has a more detailed definition
Sure.
of the objectives for the project, and those are what, as the project sponsors are coming up, and as they talk to you more in the coming months, they'll be referencing a set of more detailed ones, and it's that set of more detailed ones that we are talking to. So you could say, I suppose, if you achieve all of the things that are on these 2 slides I'm talking to, you will have achieved that summary objective.
Okay. That's what I wanna know. And so if I may, so you're gonna go to the second slide, is that about Business Direct as well?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I'll let you go to the second slide and maybe I'll have a follow-up question after that.
Okay, all right. So the second set, again, this is continuing the same list. First one is improved resource management through IT infrastructure and automation of manual processes. This one, again, our assessment is not yet achieved. Part of the concept is improving the productivity of staff through more automated workload flow. That has not happened. In fact, the general consensus of staff is that their productivity is less now than it was before the system went live. Some of that is due to the conversion issues that the system experienced and having to make data fixes and so on. But a lot of it is really down to training. We talked about this a little bit in the July presentation. We're going to talk about it a little bit more when we talk about our interviews with staff, but that is the key factor right now that's probably limiting the productivity benefits from the system. The functionality is there, the workflow tools are there. It's people's ability to actually use the system is causing the issues. And so, I think you've been hearing and we'll hear more about, there's a new training program that is in development, which has been designed to improve the user's ability to use the system and basically, get them to achieve this objective. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we think that training program is going in the right direction in terms of the strategy for it. But again, it hasn't been rolled out yet. It's in the process of being rolled out, and certainly the business users are not seeing the benefits of that program yet. So that's still sort of a hurdle that the project has to jump. There are 3 after this around tax compliance and enhanced decision-making for CalSTRS management and for you as the board, and elimination of negative audit findings, none of which we can make any assessment on at this time. We don't have the data around it. The last one, though, I think is interesting around as an objective to provide a flexible framework to incorporate future changes to the business environment. So this is the challenge with a lot of these old systems. It's very hard to make changes. It's labor intensive. It's error prone. The SAP software that was implemented as the basis for Business Direct should provide this kind of foundation. It's intended to provide a platform that allows for this kind of flexibility, but the project hasn't gone through one of these changes yet to know whether it really is going to. There are 2 in the pipeline that will be a test of this, though, AB 340 and the GASB changes. How those changes are implemented to Business Direct should be a good test about whether this, in fact, is a flexible framework. So once those are in progress or implemented, we should have enough evidence to say yes or no, this really is a flexible framework for you. In principle, it should be, but we don't have a demonstration at this point of whether it really is. As you can see, for many of these, it's not yet, but it's really too early to tell in many respects. And so what we will be doing every time we come back to you, as we have more data And as users are starting to get more knowledge about the system, is providing updates to you on whether the system is on track to achieve these, or whether the things such as, for example, the improved training capabilities or the deployment of the AB 340 and GASB changes, whether it looks likely that they will in fact achieve these objectives, or in fact it's likely that they won't at any point. At this point, we don't see any sort of showstoppers in the sense that the system's just not going to get there, but there are a few areas, in particular around the training, where there's still a significant gap between what the solution could provide and what it's currently providing today.
So, can you give examples, or given it's sort of in the, what I see from your chart, that we're in kind of the yellow status with Business Direct, I mean, are there examples of how the work of CalSTRS is impacted negatively in some way because of that? Sort of, we're not quite there yet, or?
I think a big piece of it is around sort of backlog. There's been an ongoing backlog that the staff are working very hard to clear out. But for example, it's something I mentioned in a minute. There've been a number of late payment penalties that the organization has had to pay because they haven't been able to make payments on time. During the development of the financial statements, which were developed on time, but it required a number of manual corrections to the data because the system was, because release 1.5 isn't implemented, the system wasn't able to produce the data in the fully correct format in an automated fashion. So it created additional work for financial services staff to be able to produce the correct financial statements. That's a couple of examples.
Okay.
Good.
Sure.
All right.
All right. One of the things we talked about in July was sort of trying to get at maybe sort of a gut check on how the user community are feeling about the project. And so what we did was, I guess we conducted an informal survey by interviewing a number of Business Direct users across the organization, some in financial services, but a lot in other parts of the organization who are active users of the system. So I want to talk a little bit about, the kind of questions we asked and the kind of feedback we got. So there were a series of questions we asked about their ability to just do their job and how they felt about the system in general. The first question was whether they knew how to obtain support. Like, did they know where to go when something went wrong? And 60% of them said they did, but that's still a significant number that felt they weren't really sure what to do if they were having problems. Now, as I'll be talking about a little bit later, one area of significant improvement over the past month or so has been in the support processes for the project. I think the organization has done a pretty good job in the last 6 or 8 weeks of documenting those and formalizing those, and they're now, I think, more in a more mature state than they were 6 or 8 weeks ago. This is likely to improve, but it still shows there's a gap, at least an understanding of who to go to for help. There are, in the area of reporting internal controls, which is a very significant part of what the project was intended to do, 50% of the staff felt that financial and budget reporting had been improved. Given that the release 1.5 functionality, which is primarily around reporting, has not been implemented, that's maybe not surprising. It's something we'll have to, re-examine once that functionality is on board. But 90% of the people we talked to felt that internal controls had been improved, and they felt the system was likely to improve the internal control environment for the organization. So that's part of, why we're saying that it seems pretty likely that objective will be achieved, even though we can't give a final affirmative on that. 100% of the people we talked to said they needed additional training. So again, consistent message around that. And 90% of them, and 90% of them felt that they were less efficient in doing their work. But 75 of them said they could actually do their job adequately in the system. So it wasn't necessarily preventing them doing their work, but they were somewhat less efficient at doing it. And the remedy they were looking for was additional training. And that's really the message, if I'm going to summarize all of this. That the system's working, people are doing their work, but they're not as efficient as they could be, and the effective training is a big piece of the gap. So any questions about that?
I'm just wondering, I think the the jobs are being done, but the change and how difficult it is to go through change, some people don't feel like it. I mean, they might be doing it very efficiently, but they just don't realize it yet because they're not familiar enough with the system.
Possibly. And I think when Robin comes up, she's going to talk a little bit about the sort of the standard adoption cycle for systems like this. And there's a graph she's going to show you about, and I think she's pretty much right on with where the organization is in terms of the ability to sort of go through this change. It's
Hanging
a
in
hard
the
thing.
trough.
In the trough. So you're starting to climb out of the trough.
We're gonna get out.
But, to ease that climb, you need all the support you can get. And I think
Yes,
this training is a piece that will help people, make that jump.
Thank you. Tom?
You asked I had two questions. You asked my first one, which is it in fact a loss of productivity or just a perceived one? And then the second is, because you've mentioned training a lot, how is the training provided? Is this an outside vendor? Is it something you train people within the system on?
It's an outside vendor, and it's probably worth talking a little bit about the difference in approach that's being taken with this new training strategy compared to what was provided during the initial system rollout. The initial training that was deployed to the user community, I mean, there were some logistical issues around providing it and things like that, but in addition, it was training on the system. Like, how do you use the SAP software to execute various transactions? The approach that is being taken now, which we consider a much better approach, is training on the end-to-end process, of which using the system is just some steps in that process. It's really training, how do you do your job in this new environment, not just how do I use the system to get something done. And taking that approach does make it much more easy for people to sort of move into that new world, because you are giving them sort of the end-to-end experience. And also, of course, the fact that it's being done when the system is live and they can go directly to using the system will help as well. But that difference in approach, we think, is a very positive.
And who's the vendor?
It's actually, it's part of the cyber contract. They were the implementation vendor. They've been providing training, and they've had somebody come in as part of that.
Alrighty.
Okay.
So, Graham, we have about 10 more minutes
All right,
before
so
we need to break.
Okay, so this very quickly. Some of you may be familiar with this concept of a post-implementation evaluation report, or a PIA for short. It's something that the state does quite a lot. CalSTRS does it as well. It's usually done 12 to 18 months after a system implementation and looks at just this kind of thing, objectives, lessons learned, and so on. As we sort of said, it's really too early to talk a lot about what business directors really done. We're going to be coming to you every time we talk to you, but our recommendation that you consider requesting a peer or something like a peer in 9 to 12 months, because at that point the system should have had enough time to really demonstrate it, whether it's doing it or not, and provide a more formal readout on the project's
And
objectives.
that's done internally?
It's usually
Yes, that's actually, as part of the PMO process, we actually schedule those as projects end. We actually schedule them out. So 12 months from January, we'll be going back to the Carm folks and doing a peer at that time.
okay.
Thank you.
All right. So summary of the situation. I think I've talked about pretty much everything on this slide already. We've had challenges during the stabilization period. Some of the issues I think we've already talked about. Positive side, I think the production support is really now starting to turn a corner in terms of the documentation of the processes, and the number of tickets that are being opened every month is now starting to be less than the number are closed. And the training consultant, as we discussed, I think that's a very positive approach they're taking. So final piece is, this is our regular status update. I think we talked about most of this already. The things that are a development from the last time we talked, we've been talking about these support processes for months and months with you, and they are now fully documented, and they are working against these documented processes, which has helped. The project is also now implemented a much improved schedule management discipline. So they're really using their schedule as a tool to help with decision-making around managing dependencies and resources across all the different activities within Business Direct, and that is also a very positive development. So We had Business Directors Yellow Plus in our August report. We think there's a good chance in our September report, if they keep these things up and the training program continues to roll out as it's planned, that we'll be upgrading this to green. Okay? Be September. But we'll be coming back to you in November, but we do report. Yeah. Okay. Any questions before I move on to pension? Okay, let's do pension. So this first part is going to be a little faster because we are very, very early in the pension project. So these are the major benefits around the pension solution that were discussed a little bit just earlier when Peggy was up here. This is what we are going to be looking at for multiple years. Key point I would make is that we don't have to wait until the implementation work starts before we can start to make an assessment on whether this is on track. So as the procurement is going through, we're going to be coming back to you and giving you any feedback around whether we feel the direction that the project is going, is there any risk to any of these being achieved, and hopefully providing you some information and maybe some questions to ask during that process. So you can sort of keep a finger on the pulse of where the procurement is going. In terms of the risk mitigation strategies that Chris was talking about, you can think of these as the strategic objectives for the procurement phase, as opposed to the actual deployment of the pension solution. And so this, again, we're going to be coming back to you at each board meeting and talking about our assessment of how well the project is implementing these strategies. So I'll run through these relatively quickly. First one was around a discovery effort and market research prior to procurement. Project achieved that. We think they actually did it pretty well. And it was a well-done market research effort. Got good information out of it, and it's being used. The next four around incorporation of lessons learned, adequate resources assigned to the project, early engagement of change management, and this flexible procurement and phased implementation approach, all underway. We think the project is doing a pretty good job of deploying these strategies at this point. So you can have a level of confidence this is being implemented as per the plan. The next one, adherence to project management and system development methodologies. There are two pieces of this. Systems development is really the process of implementing the software. That won't really begin in earnest until the implementation work starts, although the project is taking some initial steps around requirements management in that arena. So that's why we say not yet, but beginning. The other part of this, around project management. For those of you who are here in July, you might remember we had a discussion about the idea of creating an environment, sort of a project management culture on the project before the implementation vendor ever arrives, so that by the time the vendor gets here, the team is already sort of a machine, an effective project management machine, and it creates a level of performance that the implementation vendor has to step up to, and sort of the expectations are set. The project is just really starting to do that. They're putting in place a lot of the disciplines and schedule management practices and risk management and the rest of it that will, if that continues, provide a pretty good baseline, I think, for the vendor when they come in. They'll sort of have a good peer to work with in terms of the ability to manage a project. And it will provide, I think, a good set of expectations. So that's just starting at this point. And then the final piece around sound, transparent program governance, I was saying just underway. CalSTRS has a pretty mature investment management process through EPIC and so on, and project management processes. But at program management level, it's really just starting under the Business Renew program. And a lot of the pieces around that, like a program level schedule and resource management and requirements management, they're really just in their infancy. So that's something we're looking to develop over the next 6 months or so. And again, so before the vendor actually comes in, those program management practices are pretty solid. Any questions about that before we? Okay. All right. So in terms of status, project is on schedule. So the RFP release in November is on track. We had our major area of concern last month in August was around the schedule and having a robust schedule and all the things to give you confidence that you can achieve that date. The project has done that, and so that part of the project we're upgrading to green. If there's a real risk around the issuance of the RFP at this point, in our consideration, it's around the review cycle and all the different parties that have to be involved and getting all of those parties together in agreement. And a lot of it is devil in the details, of a procurement document like this, can they get all of those people together and in consensus on something? And that's our major concern at this point in terms of a risk for a November release. There's a process that's been defined and agreed to by all the parties, but it's really, can that process be executed in the way it's been planned? So that is the main thing we're going to be looking at, as well as reviewing the draft RFP and so on over the next month or so, is that process to get all of the feedback and accommodate that feedback, make sure everybody's heard, and then make the appropriate decisions on what the actual procurement documents look like. Is that process being managed effectively? So any questions about that? Okay, so very quickly then, data prep. Same concept. These are the three primary project objectives for the data prep project. Data that can be relied on for accurate payment of member benefits, data is ready for conversion into the new pension system. Those two, the project isn't done, so not yet, but the project is underway towards that, and we feel they're on a pretty good track to achieve those objectives within the time frame that they've stated. The last one around a program and processes are in place to ensure integrity of the data into the future. That is something that data prep is looking at, but really that is something that enterprise information management will be putting together as part of the program. And so that's something we'll come back to in a second. In terms of the status for the project, in prior months, we talked about they were having some challenges with resource management and with schedule. They were falling behind. They didn't have some of the right staff. They've pretty much rectified all of that. The schedule has been redefined. They have the staffing in place now. They're executing on that. So our anticipation is that we had this as yellow in our August report. Our anticipation is that we're going to be upgrading this to green in September. And then the final one is Enterprise Information Management Project. So this is actually our final report on this project. It is now complete. Set of objectives that they plan to do around, training and education, an assessment of CalSTRS information management practices, a gap analysis around the current state, where CalSTRS wants to be, and then a roadmap of how to get from here to there. All of that has been achieved. So all the deliverables are in, they've been accepted, and pretty much the organization got out of the project what they wanted to get out of it. The challenge now is to implement a program to affect those recommendations. And so that's really the focus, and it's what Brian's going to be talking about a little later on today. And I think that our main comment would be that as this program is established, it really has the opportunity to support a lot of the other projects in their information management goals. The data prep objective I just talked about is one significant example. Pension solution is obviously another. But this program really has the potential to be a real opportunity for the organization to better manage data and to provide sort of a foundation for the other projects. And that's what we're going to be looking for as the project rolls out over the next year or so. Okay. Any additional questions?
I don't have anyone in my list. Does anyone have any questions? Great, thank you very
Thank you.
much.
I was
And
only
we didn't
4
have to
minutes
hold
late.
you over until after the next item.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll recess for lunch and we will be back at 1. Over to you, we're on item 7, the economic impact of the CalSTRS benefit payments.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. Some of you may recall that back in 2007, we had done a study on the economic impacts of CalSTRS benefits. We thought it would be helpful information as there was a lot of discussions going around the value of defined benefit plans, and we wanted to provide that kind of information that was actually provided some very interesting results in terms of the impacts around different parts of the state. And so we felt it was a good time to update that study up to 2013. And in this particular case, we took an even more granular approach where not only did we identify the impacts on individual counties and regions, but also we found it was very useful when we talked with legislators about the impact of CalSTRS in their districts to try to get more information around what the economic impact of CalSTRS is in their district. So we commissioned University of the Pacific to do that analysis for us. And with us today, we have Dr. Jeffrey Michael and Dr. Thomas Pogue from the university who conducted the research. And I'll sort of turn it over to them to sort of provide the highlights of their study. And then after they're completed, I'll sort of talk a little about where we're going from here with that information and additional studies. So I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Jeff Michael, Director of the Business Forecasting Center at University of the Pacific, and next to me is my Associate Director, Dr. Thomas Pogue. I believe this will advance the slides. Yeah. So we have a brief presentation of the highlights for you today. We're going to walk through the methodology and approach, how this impact study works statewide, and look at some of the regional breakdowns, regions and counties, but we actually went far deeper than that in the report. So I'm going to talk through the first couple of slides and then hand it over to my colleague Tom after that. So methodology. I mean, you've probably seen economic impact studies before, that utilize the implant software, so I'll talk a little bit about that. They aren't all necessarily alike. You might think they all look alike in the sort of the results, but they aren't. So I wanted to highlight a few things that we did here that really made this assessment pretty detailed, in our opinion. A bit stronger than some of the other assessments that have been done across the country in similar studies. The first thing is that we used known expenditure patterns for retirees in the Western U.S. from the Consumer Expenditure Survey to model the allocation of disposable incomes for your beneficiaries. So that's a little bit more detailed approach than some impact studies are. As mentioned, we actually created 250 detailed models for all the different geographies we looked at, every county in the state, big regions of the state, and various political jurisdictions, so that we could look at the impacts within those areas. So we had to spend a lot of time creating models and cutting the data in a lot of different ways to get that rich geographical detail. Second is we looked at government expenditures supported from CalSTRS. I'll show you in a flow chart in a moment how we did that. And finally, in this sort of study, a lot of the spending is retail expenditures. And in impact studies, you have to be real careful with how you handle retail spending. There's issues with leakages and margining. What do you attribute to what the stores and the retail operations are producing versus the merchandise on the shelf and where that comes from? So that's an important area where we were sort of careful and conservative with the results. So this slide of the statewide economic impact, this is sort of a flow chart that we created to help you understand the process a little bit of how the study works. So it starts with the gross benefit payments to your beneficiaries, of $9.2 billion, and I believe it was last fiscal year's expenditure, right? 2012, yes. So $9.2 billion. Then from how does that go to the economic impact study? From that $9.2 billion, we estimated $742 million of it is saved and not spent in the economy. Again, based on what consumer surveys for people of retirement age tell us and how they spend their money. So we took that out of the model. And that's sort of a conservative assumption because ultimately those savings will generate income and lead to some economic activity at some point, but not in 2012. So those have sort of leaked out of the model. The tax payments, the withholdings for federal and state income tax, your staff, the data shows that it was about $1.3 billion, so that gets pulled out and over to the right. Now, the tax payments we pulled back into the model. Income tax payments to California, we assumed totaled about $286 million. We assumed that was all spent in the state of California, and we used the state budget to allocate those funds and pull those back in. So you see the $286 million coming back into the government expenditures. For the federal tax payments, those are more, $903 million, and we only we used federal spending patterns and publications that show how those funds are allocated by state, and that shows that about 10.5% of the federal government spending occurs in California, and we only took that piece and allocated that to spending in California, assuming all that money goes to Washington, and it's not obviously there's a lot more than $106 million in federal spending in California, but we were conservative and only took that 10.5% back and recycled it into the model. So you have that 392 million in government expenditures supported through those tax payments here within the state, and $7.3 billion in net beneficiary expenditures that were allocated across sectors. So like 30% of that went to various retail expenditures, 20% to housing-related expenditures, and lower amounts to travel and tourism, restaurants, and things of that nature. And that is what you enter into all these economic impact models, and so those give you direct output effects. So the direct output effect is $5.5 billion, and if you're wondering how all of a sudden it goes from 7.6 to 5.5 billion, and part of that is what I was referring to when I talked about the retail leakages and margining. You go to the store, you buy clothing or a television that maybe was produced somewhere else, and so the merchandise is like a leakage, but you are supporting economic activity through the retailer and the wholesaler. So there's some leakage there. The output effects are those direct expenditures. In an economic impact model, there are these sort of multiplier effects or indirect effects that happen. Indirect effects, just to use the illustration, if one of your members were to take their payment and go out to dinner and buy dinner, obviously there's direct effects supporting jobs and income at the restaurant itself. The indirect effects would be the restaurant purchasing inputs from its suppliers. So it purchases food from a supplier, and how those inputs trace through the economy through the repeated expenditures. And then the induced effects are the income from the people working at that restaurant. So the tips they might receive or the paychecks they receive, and then they in turn go out and spend those dollars, on their own activities. And so that generates these multiplier effects, and ultimately, we estimated $11 billion in output. You have a similar process going on for employment and labor income, and so you can see the totals that we got to there. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Pogue, to finish the presentation now.
Thanks. I'm just going to run through a few of the statewide and then the regional and county highlights that we found. One of our findings in terms of the statewide total employment impact was that it is similar in scale to the nonprofit sector in California. Although CalSTRS payments aren't an economic sector in and of themselves, they're an income stream, it provides a bit of context by making some of these comparisons. So we tried to look at what was a similar scale of impact, and that was the nonprofit sector. Looking at the statewide total output impacts, that is equivalent to the winery sector in the state. So in terms of the size of the output effect, that was about the same size as the winery sector. The labor income effect, that was about the same size as the online or direct sales sector in California. And again, one of the important impacts of these payments is the fact that they are geographically spread across the entirety of the state. They're not a sector located just in one geography. They go across all of the state and all of the various subregions of the state. We also used those detailed input-output models and social accounting matrices to estimate what were the taxes generated by these payments. And you'll see the lines 1.1 to 1.5 are the various subcomponents of those taxes associated with these payments. They total about $892 billion to state and local governments across these various categories of tax payments made by the CalSTRS payments. In addition, there's the payments made directly from CalSTRS for the income tax payments to the state, giving us about $1.2 billion in state and local government payments. We also did a similar exercise. Those are the lines 2.1 to 2.4 to look at where the scale of federal payments made by these expenditures, primarily going to income taxes and health and disability and retirement payments made by those people being impacted by these expenditures in the economy. And those, along with the income tax payments, totaled about $1.9 billion for a total of $3.1 billion in tax payments associated with the CalSTRS beneficiary payments. Looking just at a couple of quick examples here in terms of the regional and the county-wide highlights, we found that, not surprisingly, the largest economic impacts were in the areas with the largest economies and populations. That's where more teachers are and where more of the payments went to. Highest job totals, again, those followed closely to the size of the economic impacts. But where you see a difference in terms of the importance across the entirety of the state is when you look at it in the context of the relative economy, where we look at it to benefit payments to the gross regional product or the scale of their economies. And then you see some of the more rural areas featuring higher in terms of the scale of the payments and associated impacts. The mother lode region, the northern Sierra Nevada region, I've got a map here, which maybe you can see it, where these regions are. Even though there isn't a huge total impact, they're greater in effect when you look at it on a relative level across the state in the rural areas. Obviously, the Bay Area and LA, though, are the dominant destination of the payments. Looking across the counties, again, a similar story comes through where the largest by population and economies counties are the biggest in the economic impacts, and the biggest job effects are also seen there. And again, as with the regions, when you look at it in a relative basis, you see the more rural areas benefited substantially as well when you look at it relative to the size of their regional product. And we have maps throughout the report of all the geographies showing the relative impact to try to give some context of where the money in total impact is going. And we have tables in all the appendices showing these rankings and relative scales throughout for all the 250 geographies that we looked at. And I guess I'll hand it back over to you.
Sure. I guess it's a question whether you have any questions about the report. I just want to also to sort of let you know in terms of where we're going from here is this is on our website. We're also going to, because there's a lot of data here around the impact, the economic impact by legislative and congressional district. And we get this request a lot from some of our stakeholders. They want to sort of see what it is because it helps them in their own advocacy. We are going to put on the website this information so that people can readily incorporate that within their own information, as well as the information that we provide when Mary Ann is talking to legislators and we give them a fact sheet about their district. We're going to start incorporating some of this information too, because we find that they find it very interesting to just get a sense of what the impact of CalSTRS is on their district. So we're going to incorporate that information more into the material we provide.
So Ed, when we did do that before, we actually made some sort of graphic for each particular legislative contact that we made. Or is that what we're planning on doing again?
What we did before was we had information based on the data that we had around how many members they had and how much was paid out, but we never had the information like we do now about what the economic impact of that is,
right,
as well as telling them what the size of their own district economy is. They may not have any idea what the economic impact of their total district is, and we now have that with this model. So we'll incorporate that information into the fact sheets that we've been providing to people.
Alrighty, and within the write-up, within the charts, Senate District 1, Northeast Cal, that's SD1, it'd be SD2. I mean, I'm used to seeing it with the designation ADSD or CD with whoever the person is. This is all correlated to all those numbers, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And we didn't put the names in, we wanted to put
No,
more
I
geographic.
get that. I just wanted to make sure they were still SD and not,
Yes.
Northeast Cal was not AD2 or
No,
something like
no,
that.
no.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
it's the numbering. The other thing, the other interesting thing wasn't identified in the presentation, but it's something that we identified in our summary that the staff wrote is the fact that the impact of the benefit payments on state taxes relative to how much the state contributes to CalSTRS. The total income that's generated from the taxes of the general fund is about $677 million, which is a little more than half of what the state contributes to CalSTRS. So basically, it's sort of look at it as a net effect of the state contribution is substantially less than what it appears to be when you look at the $1.4 billion that they contribute every year.
Their return on investment?
They have a return on their investment as well, yes.
Tom?
Just a comment. Be interesting to see where the impact, the relative impact is greater. So, for example, probably the relative impact is not as high in LA County as it is in Placer County. And ranking that way would be.
Yeah, actually, that is in the material, I think. And if you go back to the slide, can you bring up that slide, the presentation again? Go back, I think
I
it
didn't
was.
notice it.
The highest, when you look at like the highest benefit payments to the gross regional product,
Yeah.
that shows you where the relative impact is greatest by county.
If you look in the appendices, sorry,
Oh.
it isn't in the overview report for all these detailed rankings, but in the appendices, we have table A3, for instance, lists the regions by their the relative impact
Okay.
to their economy. So there's a ranking for each of the geographies.
Okay, well, I'm just.
Could you give us that?
Is it on the?
Tell us what page it is.
It's page A5 of Appendix A.
Oh, you know what, the appendices,
Board book.
because the document was so large,
Oh.
we didn't include the appendices. There's a link to it in your material, but we didn't print it, so it's not in the book. It's not in the written
It's not in
material.
our written report.
Right,
Okay.
but you can access it through the link.
Okay.
It
What
was
are
with-
1 through 5 in terms of highest,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity?
Who is 1 through 5?
Motherlode, Shasta, Cascade, Northern Sierra Nevada, North Sacramento Valley, and the North Coast
Yeah.
were the 5 top regions.
Those are the, yeah, and the
And
counties are,
And those are the counties.
yeah, Sierra, Calaveras, Tuolumne, Trinity, and Mariposa are the top 5 counties relative to the size of their county economy. And to me, that
Population.
one of the interesting reasons of breaking it down by the political jurisdictions is they're all roughly the same size in population, and so that actually you could get within the sub-region level, like within the LA area, and see that there was differences within those districts. So, within the LA area, San Gabriel Valley really came out as having a large impact from CalSTRS. As an
Where I live, I
example.
just want to say San Gabriel Valley. That's for Eagle Rock. Anyone watching?
And that rural bias, for lack of a better term, was consistent with what we found when we did it before,
Previously.
where there was a relatively higher impact in the rural areas than in the urban areas.
And I thought maybe you could mention part 2, what comes after
Yeah, I was
this.
gonna do that next. And the next step we're gonna do is try to look at the economic impact of our investments. You know, there's a report that investments that we provide you every year about the sort of the gross amount of how much CalSTRS invests within California. Now we want to take a look at the economic impact of those investments in California. That's a much trickier analysis. Apple is a California company, but obviously not all of our investments affects California. Walmart's an Arkansas company, but it does have an impact on California. So we're going to be starting conversations with a number of different universities, UOP among them, just to sort of get a feel for how they might approach that, and whether or not, some discussions whether or not we sort of focus on certain asset classes where it might be a little bit easier to identify that, but that's going to be the next step in this process of trying to identify the economic impact of CalSTRS. The other thing that's coming out of our relationship with UOP is that they're training the staff on how to do this, so that we can do this on a more regular basis, and so hopefully we can provide you more often than, say, once every 6 years and look at the economic impact of our benefits.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's an example of where data, I think, will help us as a system, but it also helps our members and the constituency groups too, in terms of advocating for secure retirement for teachers in California. And that's
Exactly.
always a good thing. So appreciate the work.
And I personally, I really liked the comparisons to the wine industry and things like, I mean, and the 50% back to the state. I mean,
Yeah.
the job that you have done for us this time has been absolutely stellar. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it. I like the transfer of knowledge too. It's good too.
Yeah, these
Thank
have been
you.
replicated, you know, NIRS has been doing those by state at the national level. This had some nuances to it, though, I think that we'll point out in the methodology that maybe they might want to look at as well when
To
they're
nurse.
doing these in other states. But I'm hoping the investment analysis also sets a little bit of a pattern out there that other states will do those as well.
Grant?
Thanks, and thanks. I appreciate the work. I think it's really good. I wondered, either you or Jack, since you just mentioned others have done these studies, has anybody ever taken, because part of the value of these is showing the value of DB benefits, but has anybody tried to model, okay, if we didn't have a DB system and we had a DC system and we assume contributions are X, Y, you know, what that difference would be? So you'd take that 9.2 billion benefit payment, how much less might
Oh,
that
I
be?
see.
If we had because assuming
Yeah.
if we didn't have a DB system, we
Right.
would have something else.
A more modest
So,
benefit structure,
yeah,
how that,
so
yeah,
what
the
would-
delta on that'd be interesting. No, I haven't
It'd be
seen
hard
that.
to model, but
Yeah.
Oh, you'd have to make an assumption in the end, which is what it always comes down to, is what rate of return are they going to earn on your DC investments, because that's what's going to drive the benefit structure. And also, to what extent do people actually annuitize that benefit payment over their remaining lifetime, as opposed to just taking that money and
yeah,
buying
and assumptions
something.
about what the contributions over
Right.
time.
Yeah,
Well,
it's-
but it's a good point, because there's certainly studies that show differences in the benefit outcomes. There's more than, and there's some debate around the assumptions used in those differences. But I know, not that I'm aware, that they've taken that delta and then done an economic impact analysis of how that plays out through the economy. I think that's what you were saying. Play the stream out all the way. That's interesting. I'll suggest that to the.
But I
NIRS
guess,
folks.
and maybe this is more to them. I mean, if the resulting benefit was, say, 15% less, would these numbers just be 15% less, or is it more complicated than that?
I think, you know, there may be behavioral changes in the way people spend their money, and they're going to be dealing with more uncertainty in their income streams, and that's going to affect how they spend and the choices they make. So it's, you know, I hadn't really thought about that until this question, so I wouldn't want to speculate, but there'd be a lot to it.
And I would I mean, if if it's so closely tied to the market, and the market is such a roller coaster, it seems, I would speculate that those spending patterns would be the same too, then that would make the contribution that much more sketchy.
I would think the
To the state of
contribution
things.
might vary more from year to year,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, because most of them do not annuitize it.
Yeah,
so.
sketchy,
The
technical term,
definition of
sketchy.
sketchy, you just defined it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. I don't have anyone left in line, so we really appreciate it and look forward to continuing to work with you. So, thank you. Alrighty. Robin, I think we're back to you. Oh, closed out the wrong thing. So, CARM closeout.
I think it's on some perpetual